Okay, I'm Dr. Winkler, military historian. Got interested in the invasion of Normandy in 1962 when I was 12 years old and saw the movie The Longest Day. And so I read, by the time I graduated from high school, I'd read something like 8 or 9 books on it, and since that time frame I've read a lot more. So I'm fairly knowledgeable. Anyway, let's show you where we're at. Let's do a panorama right here. Here we are at Omaha Beach.
We are here
and
right
as we
now.
look to our side, both sides right here, this is where the 1st American Infantry Division came in, also known as the Big Red One. They had fought in Sicily, had fought in North Africa. They're highly experienced guys. They're very, very good. So these are some of the best troops we had available at that time frame. They'd spent months training for this operation in England. Now, what had happened here on the morning of June 6th was that the men were supposed to be coming through here. The actual attack was supposed to take place on June 5th, but there'd been a storm and raining, so all the guys are on the ships. They're all seasick, barfing, filling up their barf bags, barfing over the side, barfing on the deck. So they're having a pretty bad day on the 5th. However, the weather forecast for the Allies came through and said the 6th there should be a break in the storm. So this would be perfect. You had to have the right phases of the moon, so the air units, the 101st and 82nd will land over here by St. Mary Glees. The British 6th Airborne Division is going to land over by Caen. But at night, it's pretty challenging, but there should have been a full moon. So with the tides right, now what the Americans wanted to do was have the tides right. We're right here right now, look out here, we're seeing low tide.
It's low tide right now, just right like now when they came.
Now, the Germans, in other words, Rommel, thought that the Americans are coming high tide, so you just get right off your landing craft and go right into attacking the people up there. The Americans thought that was a bad idea. They wanted to come in low tide, even though you'd be exposed to fire going across here. Because when you come at low tide, then the flow of the water will actually be moving in. If you came at high tide, then the water would actually be flowing out. So it'd actually be more difficult to come at high tide. So Rommel, Erwin Rommel, the German commander here, he had them construct a lot of beach obstacles. You see them in a lot of films, the little triangular objects. They're supposed to snag the bottoms of the boats when they came in. But at low tide, that's not going to happen because the beach obstacles are there for high tide. So that actually gave the Americans some place to hide. When they actually came in, hide is not the right word, actually to be able to have some kind of place to get a little defense when the German machine guns are gunning them down up here. Now, even though the men are very well trained, the Navy personnel that was over the landing craft, we call them the Higgins boats, like 30 guys per craft, they would come in and they're supposed to wait until the water is shallow and let these guys off. And then, of course, then you splash in. Well, you come in here and the storm had washed away some of the beach. So the men are under fire. They're nervous, and I don't blame them for that. They're under fire. They come in and they hit the area that is actually shallow, like 2 feet of water. Well, let them out. So you let these guys out in 2 feet of water, but the beach's been washed out. So as the guys come in, it's 8 feet deep. So these guys are wearing they bring a lot of equipment with them. 70, 80, 90, 100 pounds is not uncommon. So these guys are in the water, and a lot of guys are going to drown simply because they let them off too early. They didn't know better, but we do now, of course. They had material. They had the idea of having floating tanks. And I don't know how you do that, have a big kind of balloon with tanks would come in. So you'd land people in here and you have the opportunity now of using tanks to fire on the German positions. That's a great idea, except it didn't work. And a lot of tanks literally sunk and the guys in them, of course, died. What was supposed to happen was the U.S. Air Force, which is really, really good at bombing German cities and bombing rail lines in France and other places. It's really, really good, but guess what? They're not terribly good at hitting a very narrow obstacle. So just before the assault they're supposed to come in and plaster these areas up here. You can turn that around and show them what I mean, the high ground up there. So you can plaster them up there.
See, look at the
Not
hills.
a bad idea. However, it works out a little bit differently.
See that up there?
It takes, since you've got hundreds of aircraft flying in, heavy bombers are flying in, and what we think's happening here is they say that, oh, wait a minute, there's a pretty good chance if we're not too careful, because the timing is to hit the German positions exactly when the landing craft land. They were afraid that perhaps if they dropped their bombs too early, rather than dropping the bombs on the German positions, they'd actually drop them on our landing craft. It's just a number of seconds, like 30 seconds. But you simply come in and they delayed bombing. It was probably a good idea, except it didn't work. They missed the German positions right over those hills, plastered, killed a bunch of cows. So the very, very important bombing that's supposed to solve the German positions did not take place. Now you've got ships out here, way out here. I think the battleship Texas was here, a bunch of really big ships. They got like 14-inch guns. That'll do a number on virtually anything. They're designed to sink other battleships. But you've got these out here, now you can fire on the German positions. They were out far enough, the sea is rolling, the fire wasn't terribly accurate, so they did not do a good enough job in softening up the German positions. So the Germans have been hurt, but not really badly. The Germans have about 500 men, that's a small battalion. And if you take the entire division here, the first divisions are like 14,000 men. So numerically, the Americans have a big advantage, but the Germans have the most important positions. So what you've got to do, you've got to cross this beach under fire. Remember, the German MG-42 will fire like 30 rounds a second. They can put down a tremendous amount of fire. You've got to get across this. You've got to get up against the seawall. At that point, the Germans' machine guns can't fire directly on you, but they can lob mortar shells over. So you're still not completely safe. So the men come here. They're, of course, if you've ever been seasick, after you blow your lunch a couple of times, then you land, you're not really seasick anymore. But these guys aren't feeling terribly good, shall we say, anyway. So you bring these guys in, there's a lot of chaos, a lot of fire going on, and in small groups, 2 and 3 and 4, that kind of thing, start pressing inland. Some of the men are confused, even though they're very, very good troops. There was a general by the name of Norman Cota. Norman Cota was like second in command of one of the units here. And he got up and started walking up and down the beach. Trying to remember the exact quote. There are two kinds of men on the beach. Those who are dead and those who are going to die. You've got to get out of here and get up there. So these guys taking their various equipment, their Bangalore torpedoes, and trying to push in various places. When the Germans start running low on ammunition, it starts actually working a little bit better. But this is, in my opinion, one of the more impressive feats of the American forces during the Second World War. They're confused, you're partially sick, you're in water, some guys drown, got all these problems, and now you've got to figure out a way of taking a German position when they have high ground and they have all the advantages. The men that are able to do that show brilliant fighting spirit in the United States. Unfortunately, before the Second World War, our enemies, Germany, Japan, and even our allies, thought the Americans can't fight. We're lazy, we drive to school, walk to school, we don't play soccer, we back off when people yell at you, and we don't have a military tradition. We have a very small army in the 1920s and 1930s. So Americans can't fight. Go read a book. Americans are damn good. We train very well, become very, very good troops, and this is a good example of how good Americans were. This is Dr. Winkler again. We have walked down right next to the water, and of course this is very, very much like it was the day of the attack. Now, one of the things that's very disturbing about this, it makes my blood run cold to think about how awful it was. The fact that I could only visualize this from reading accounts distorted what was going on, because I thought, even at low tide, that they would be much closer to the seawall over here, and that's not the case.
Look.
Panorama over there.
Look how far it is.
See how far that is. It's
Now you can tell.
It's at least a couple hundred yards farther than I have visualized.
See the rocks way out there?
Visualized.
Could you imagine having?
Coming in here.
Could you imagine having to run over this
I
beach
could not imagine that.
while
Carrying
machine
your
guns are
equipment.
shooting at you?
Now these guys are in great shape. These guys are about as good shape as anybody could ever be. You know, swimming and carrying things, that kind of stuff. But still, what's actually happening cannot really prepare you for the actual experience. One of the things that I forgot about is actually the sound of the waves. Now realize that nobody's coming in the day of the battle listening to the waves, but I am here now. They're a lot more concerned about the guys up there with machine guns and high-powered rifles. Actually, I think the fights coming in. Because as I stand here, the water keeps moving up a little bit. So it would have been more like this on D-Day because it's low tide. Obviously, under low tide, then the tide does come in. But this is gut-wrenching. It's awfully hard to look at these things without choking up. Man, it was tough. Okay. I just wanted to point out something else as well. That Eisenhower, who was the head of all of this, Eisenhower thought that, and I think he's quite right, of all possible military operations, a cross-channel invasion might be the most complicated. You've got to coordinate air power, you've got to coordinate sea power, you've got to coordinate with the weather, all these kind of things to make it work. Because if anything goes awry in your extent, you're going to have a potential disaster. So there's a lot of confidence should be given, not just the U.S. Army, but the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army Air Corps to be able to put all this together. Now, even at that, there were some issues that we'll talk more about that as we progress. Some of the other things that were challenging in that way. But the fact they pulled it off at all was quite remarkable. Now, we hear a lot about callous generals, and we really should. The guys like during the First World War didn't give a darn about the lives of their men. All they cared about was sitting in their chateaus, let them sit there to die. See, Eisenhower's not that kind. He actually cared for human beings. The night before the invasion, he went over to 105th Airborne Division, and he talked to the guys. Now I walked around, I'm the super general, so we look around. He walked around and talked to the guys personally, trying to have a little bit of connection with this guy. I know it's tough. He came up to one trooper and said, you scared, soldier? And the man says, no, sir, I'm not scared. And Eisenhower says, well, I am. And of course, he wasn't going into attack. Of course, the American soldier was being macho, which I'm sure that's what he expected. That Eisenhower was a decent guy. There was a woman who was his driver. Kate Summersby, I believe her name was. And when the men took off in the C-47s, that's the craft they used for the airborne guys to go up there. She said Eisenhower had tears in his eyes because he knew a lot of those guys were going to come up. And he knew ultimately he was responsible for all of it. In 1964, 20 years after the invasion, he'd been President of the United States, and now he's retired. They did a CBS report, and they took him here and drove him around these various places where we're at, and they talked to him about the war. And he didn't get choked up like I am, but he said that these were young men at the prime of their lives, and they were going to sacrifice their lives for our country and for free Europe. And you could tell the respect he gave them. They weren't just cannon fodder to him. They were really human beings, and he really cared.